Welcome to week 4. This week we'll be looking at more GrowFX, specifically your plants that are secondary elements in your environments, weeds, grasses. I'm going to show some techniques for flowers. We will also, in this context, be looking at shaders as well and putting shaders on them, getting prepped for Forestpack and what's to come with that in the coming weeks, and a little bit this week as well. I want to kick this off with the hero tree, or this hero fir tree that you see before you. This is a little different than some that I might do. You'll notice maybe some odd stuff going on the trunk of this tree. So this particular tree was meant to be like right up close and support a camera move that kind of moved across it. It also had some mushrooms, some other moss, some goodies on top of it. I generally don't let something just be completely bare, but even that said, I generally start with something that's got a little bit more pizzazz to it. So it's a little bit heavy, so I've included this in the downloads that you guys can grab, so you can have a look at this. As always, before I saved, excuse me, I've checked manual update. Excuse me. So when you open it, it's not going to do this. It's not going to build. But what you'll notice is this is like crazy dense down here. And the reason being is there is a bark group that I've added to this, or like a bark layer. This is individual instanced bark onto the trunk of the tree. You won't see it here, but you will see it on there. And if I turn it off, it might, and update it, so now you'll see something that is a little bit normal to what we're looking for and what you're normally looking at. The other thing you'll notice is that I've mapped this with a Vertex color. Reason being is I wanted to lighten the shader as it came down to the to the base, and then there was some other stuff like growing around it, and then as it goes up, getting darker as well. So let's look at this tree and kind of what I've done here. In line mode, I'm going to turn the bark back on, and I'm just going to turn this stuff off at the moment. We will be looking at lighting. I've also included, and when I say lighting, I mean very basically, it's more lighting for evaluating your shaders and your trees and plants and whatnot. In your download section, you will see that there are two domes. One is City HDRI, the other is Golden Hour HDRI. So feel free, grab those. You can use those to evaluate if you'd like. If you have others that you love, use them as well. I do recommend using kind of two varying domes when you're looking at this, or two varying lighting rigs. Three, being better because it's more, right? But I encourage you to kind of evaluate them in various lighting rigs, simply because when we build these assets, we want to build them in a way that they can be reused again and again and again, and we're not always having to tweak the shaders every time we change the lighting, so that they're believable and they're built in a realistic fashion. Obviously, for some shots, you still will have to tweak. There is no one perfect shader that will work for everything. Alright, so getting into this tree, we've got the trunk, and this is just standard stuff. Distributor, shooting straight up, adding a little bit of a noise to it. I'm going to get to the bark last, and then I'm going to cover the Vertex as well. I just want to show you, no cards up my sleeve or anything like that. Vertex, or vector, directions with curves, one without, and and a little bit of random direction on the branches. Again, we're going to see the same thing on the second branch. Leaves, this is where in the mesh, these guys are going to be a little bit different than normal, but you can see them, they're kind of hanging down and whatnot. Leaves B, so I have kind of two. Leaves B are the purple guys, leaves A are these pink guys, and they're kind of going like up the branches as well. Pines kind of do that, and then some of them, depending on the species, will also have like, you know, this kind of tertiary off of these as well. And a lot of that is like depending on, you know, the level of detail that you're looking at that one branch, you might want to add that. And I do sometimes. This, you know, tree wasn't really meant to support super high res branch stuff, but I did make another version of this guy which with even higher resolution branches. Then twigs that are also going to birth leaves as well. The next thing I did on this guy was made two different systems for dead branches, so, you know, down low where you know, maybe over time things have fallen off and whatnot. These are like little clipped you know, branches. Both of these do that. So nothing too crazy there. You're welcome, you know, as I've included this, you're welcome to tear it apart. I will also be including the shaders and all of the maps that go with this. There's a maps raw, or you can use zip or whatever you guys like to use, but I've included all of that so you can repath these and you can see what I was doing. Alright, so I'm going to turn everything off here. Everything. And I'm going to go to mesh. I'm going to update. Alright. And then I'm going to open my mesh builder. So the only special thing going on here is that I've done this vertex color. So this is under mesh builders. Come down to the bottom by UV and you can check open vertex. And then I've used vertex color coloring along paths. So I've turned this on and you'll notice this has lots of different functions, like Photoshop basically. So once you start kind of adding vertex colors and adding one on top of another, and you can inherit from the parent. So children of this path, so of this trunk, can inherit this vertex color. So let's say I have branches, they're here, and then I also have branches, they're up here. To start, these branches would be white, these branches would be black, right? So that would be them inheriting. But then they could also have vertex color along their paths. So then we get into this blending mode between the two, where you can have, it starts white, but then maybe you flip the vertex color on those, so then they go from white to black, right? And then you can multiply or whatever to get these kind of varied results off of the vertex color for the children. You don't have to inherit from parent. Each path can have its own vertex color along its path respectively. But sometimes I use this option. I used this option for the bark. So instead of you know, trying to get vertex color on each of these little instances, I took the trunk, gave it one big vertex color, which for its shader isn't actually doing anything. And then if we turn the bark on, give it a second. So if you don't have a fast machine, I don't recommend doing something like this. Most of our nodes are 48 gig and above, with many 64 gig and above. This particular tree, something like this, you're going to want 32 gig if you start to really make multiples of them and up to render something like this. So this is not something I do every day. So don't do it. I don't recommend it. But it is a cool technique I want to show you guys, and even if you did something like this in an isolated section, maybe like, you know, from here to here, on some sort of hero, you know, foreground thing, this would be something that could really get you started. Okay, so let's zoom in on this bad boy, if it'll let me. It says, no way, Chad. Let me go back to line mode here real quick. I don't even know where it went. So as you can see, it's unruly at best. Come here. There he is. Really wants to put up a fight. Alright, let's turn that guy off. I will win. Turn it back on. Okay. So, while we're in line mode, the thing I want to show you though is, again, on the bark, let's close this. On the bark, I'm again using Vertex color. And you'll notice I'm not coloring along its path, but I am inheriting from the parent. So as these pieces of bark, and what these guys are is their path distributors, okay? And remember the copy direction guy I showed you on the on that last like tree where I took it into ZBrush and was sculpting that a little bit. So this is the same thing. It's path distributor, so they're distributed all along, you know, the path. And the density is set insanely high. I've got 1,000 for the density. I've got some chaos density, so there are some holes and whatnot. And then these guys are set to turn 90. And once you tell it to copy, they are going to inherit this direction of this spline. So as it like zigs and zags and does whatever, so will they. The only other thing that you need to do, though, is set this radial direction or offset, and then oh, alright, I did it over here. So the other thing you need to do, though, is set this guy, this radial offset, so it's offset enough from the trunk that the trunk's thickness and this copy direction's thickness are the same amount. And I think that, yeah, this is mapped up in here. And then you'll see I have a curve to control that. So this is the base, and then as the mesh gets thinner, so does the radius of these guys, this copy direction. And you can't set that there. You actually have to go to this path position, and this is where it gets like totally confusing. You're going to see this a couple of times today. But this is not going to set the offset along the range of that path. To get that, you're going to have to go to path position. You will add a new effector. You will go under your bark. You will go under your path distributor, or sorry, your copy direction, and you will go to this radial offset. And then you will say OK, and then you can add a curve to that. So once I did that, now I've got all these bark pieces following that. In order to mesh it, I simply, where are they? Used leaf meshes and gave them a width so they have a little bit of a, well, actually I just set it. I think at one point the only reason why I have this curve in here is I was messing with maybe they're a little bit wider and they go narrower, and then just decided to keep it the way it is. So they're basically rectangles, or they are, not basically, and then I gave them some material IDs, some varying material IDs. So if we zoom out here, and let's quick render this guy. So what I was going for is like, little bits of bark kind of poking off and hanging off, things where they're like overlapping, and by meshing the bark basically and giving it a couple different color variations, you don't end up with just the repeating tiling bark pattern. Mix that in with the Vertex color, and then you can even see like this is where the bark is not actually covering. If I like really zoom up, obviously all of this is fairly low res, but or my samples are low res, so that's the bark underneath, or the tree underneath, the exposed wood basically, and then I have these little bark, elements all over the place. So then mix this with a little bit of moss and maybe some like mushrooms or other components that you want to add to this, and it can really start to stand up to a lot of resolution. These little guys hanging off there. A displacement is not going to give you that, and bark does do this. It kind of, if you look at the edges, you'll have like little pieces that are kind of sticking off or hanging off and doing weird kind of funky stuff. So that's the idea. Just kill that. So then I'm going to turn this off. For the leaves, now I'm going to get into the shaders for these guys. Let me open that. So in here, actually real quick, before we do that, in here I have one of the domes that I was using, and all I've done, hopefully everybody is familiar with this. This is a V-Ray dome. It's a V-Ray light. It has been set to type dome. It has been set invisible. And then I've checked use texture, and I'm using a V-Ray HDRI, and this is the HDRI that I'm using. This guy has then been set, by default it will be set at 3D Max Standard. I have opened this up, set it to spherical. I've then come down, and the coordinates are environment, and the mapping is spherical environment. It is set inverse gamma, and its gamma is at 1. I often tweak my HDRIs with, like, messing with the gamma a little bit, and then also messing with the overall multiplier. For something like this, I'm not going to, because it's really just a light to kind of evaluate things. But that is your very basic HDRI workflow. Use the V-Ray HDRI loaders for this, simply because you can tweak the gamma. If you wanted stronger shadows or something like this, bring the gamma down. The offset of that is you are also going to get a lot more saturation and color. So you can throw these V-Ray HDRIs inside of a color corrector. You can desaturate it in order to get stronger shadows but less saturation. You can also bring your overall multiplier up. This is going to bring the whole lift the whole thing basically. But if you kind of gamma down and mult up, you'll get a brighter spot with more contrast by gammaing down, and then throw that inside of a color corrector to desaturate it so you don't get those overly saturated tones. That's kind of about all I wanted to cover as far as lighting for this. I would recommend setting yourself up 2 layers though, and putting 2 different dome lights on the 2 layers. So if we, I'm just going to open this guy. If you aren't working with the onion, I would recommend doing something like this. I don't know, who's working with what at this point. Okay, so we'd have like lighting A, and maybe I'd set that in there and turn that off, and then we'd make a new dome, and make sure it's set invisible, unless you want to see it in the background. Go out, grab an HDRI, and then I simply click and drag that up there. Make sure it's instanced as well. And we will go grab this is the other one that I have provided for you guys. Set spherical environment. Spherical environment. Gamma is still 1. Okay, so we've got two different hello. Decide how to create it or something. Am I really that brilliant? Apparently not. I didn't click it out into the screen. Awesome. So let's do that again. All right. Now he has been created. And pasted as an instance. And I'm not going to change anything for the moment. Alright, so then you'd have these two different layers. The next thing you'd want to do is in your render settings, in your globals. Once this opens, is you'll want to make sure that hidden lights is not checked. Because if this is checked, and you're like, oh, I'm rendering, I'm doing my second light, well, no, you're not. Even though this light is hidden, it's going to be lighting with both domes, and you don't want to do that. So, the other thing that's really important, okay, I should have covered this right out the gate. Everybody, if you have not, go download V-Ray 3.00.07. This is the one that's provided with the class. I want to make sure that we're all running with the exact same version. V-Ray 3 is going through a lot of changes right now. Unfortunately, we are not getting the version that we're using at Blur. I'm going to talk with them about it or see if I can get them to get us a newer student version. Because one of the new features that I was hoping to be able to show you guys relates to alpha mapping and opacity mapping with trees and whatnot. So instead of, well, you would use this opacity, but you get this new option under your options, and it's how you want it to treat opacity maps. And unfortunately, the version that we're running does not have that new hot feature. The other thing, though, that as we go through this, I'm going to have you guys turn off a lot of the new features. If you're not using V-Ray 3 and this is your first foray into it, there are many things that are different about it, and I will kind of cover some of those things, but a lot of the new features, if you don't have the right type of processor, if you're not using, these very specific things, it is going to be buggy as all get out for you. Unfortunately, that is the state of the union at the moment. I will go over those things soon. It's not going to be this class. That's not what we're doing. But do bear in mind that if you guys, you're running into, my trees rendering slow and whatever, a lot of things are going to affect that. Your min and max subdivisions, your color threshold, how you have your opacity set, your GI settings. There are a number of things that go into that, and we will get into, optimizing your scenes and getting them rendering faster. But that is not this lesson. I do recommend using Quick Render. It will, help to speed up your evaluation renders. If you will continue to have issues, we'll go over that in the live session. I'll take your scenes and make them go faster. So that being said, everybody get the same version of V-Ray. Do it now. All right. So that was dome lights and my rant on everybody getting V-Ray, the same version. I'm going to turn the other one back on. And I want to look at this shader for this tree. Okay, so when I was showing you this, not that. When I showed you the bark and we were under the meshing parameters, you saw that I overrode the mat ID. So I had 234 in here. So all that is I've set a bark mid, a bark light, and a bark dark. These are basically the same shader. And all I've done, I think in these guys, did I do it in the output? Let's see if I remember. It might be in how I multiplied these. Ah, yeah, it is. Okay, so I have like a grunge map that I applied to these guys. And so it's just this little grungy map. And I used the Vertex color, or Vertex channel, as and your map channel will be 0 for this, as a mask. So that's my alpha for this guy, and I'm multiplying it over top of this bark texture. So here we have it. This is super low res, and honestly, they're tiny little pieces. So it's like, these guys are like that big. So it doesn't really need to be all that high res in the first place. So I'm multiplying that grunge up on top of it. In this case, I'm multiplying it at 10%. And then each one of these guys, you can see I've got an opacity map in here. And if I come down here, here's my awesome custom painted with a fuck up right there opacity map. And a couple of things, I'm using a V-Ray HDRI. You're going to see all of these are V-Ray HDRIs, unless I screwed up. My gamma, because this is an opacity map, is set to 1. And the other thing is my blur amount is set to 0.01. Okay, this is really important in your opacity maps. V-Ray hates opacity maps. It also hates what I did right here. See these like kind of medium zones? This is not pure white. This is not pure black. It hates me for that. But it'll get over it. And you saw it really didn't take all that long to render that with all of those, thousands of pieces of bark all up on top of each other. But it's important you set that blur amount down. What the new hotness and the options where it gives you this little fly out, that is basically you don't have to do that blur amount, and you tell it how you want it to handle, and you've got a couple different options. So we can all be remiss that we are missing that feature at the moment. So, but you'll see the thing that I wanted you guys to notice though is this Vertex color and using that in the shader. I will use this as a mask a lot of the time. So I'll mask like either a color or something like that, or I will sometimes in some instances take this guy, place it over here, and set it like to a, one of my options is like a lighten or a plus or something like that. Addition rather in this case, to make it brighter as it goes, maybe to the top, or if it's a leaf, I'll set this so it's maybe a little bit more yellow toward the edge of the leaf, something like that. In which case, that I might do with a color. I would do like a V-Ray color that's yellow, and this guy as the alpha again. But using that vertex color for additional control over your texture along the paths, along your leaves, all of that stuff, really important. That is a lot of the power of GrowFX. If you're not doing that, you're like half using the program. So I just want to real quick go through. So bump maps, I am using them. None of this is like crazy complicated here in this case. Pretty normal stuff. Just throwing it into a color correction, brightness and contrast until I kind of get it to look what I want. Sometimes I'll throw an output up on top of that as well to really set the value exactly where I want it. If you were setting like a reflection glossiness of 0.7 as you're experimenting, and then you decide you want to put an additional map into here, you can, in the output, clamp it as well. So reflection map looks very similar to the bump map, and then the glossiness is just cranked down low. I'm going to leave all of my subdivisions at the moment at 8. We will get into shader workflow, lighting subdivisions, GI subdivisions in a later lesson. If right now you're noticing like, Chad, why are you doing that? That's because I'm not going to go over it right now. It's another broader discussion, but we will be revisiting all of our shaders, or not necessarily all of them, but some of them down the road. But I would not advise you to just as if you have some experience with shader subdivisions, reflection subdivisions, and so on, I do not recommend you just oh, I'm going to crank all my stuff to 32 or something like that, just because I know I'm going to need more subdivisions. Don't do that, because these trees might be way off in the distance, they might be scattered about. We might want to make another instance of a shader where it has higher subdivisions for one that's in the foreground, but then you've got more in the background, and cranking this value is just going to make some distant point that has depth of field on it anyway in the first place just take longer to render. So don't start screwing with these values. We will. Okay, so the next thing I do for something like this, the pine needles. So I know that there's been some discussion on pine needles. And again, I use an opacity map. And that blur amount, really important. Get that guy set down. V-Ray HDRI loader. A little bit of a normal map. And then this is just super simple. It's a mask. This is the stick, and these will be where the leaves are. Nothing crazy going on there. The one thing though is I am using V-Ray colors, and when you first start out, I'm gonna actually make one of these just so you can see. When you make a V-Ray color the first time, it's going to say none. Okay. When you make a V-Ray color the second time, actually let's just cut this guy and make a V-Ray color. Let's see if it does it. Yeah, so he opens up at specify, and if you paste a color into here, let's say I had a color in mind, and let's copy this guy. I had a color in mind, and you'll notice it just went, all these shades brighter, because it's assuming that this is your gamma color, your 0.454 color, and that's not the case. That's not what we want. What we want is to paste into here, and then we want to specify. And now you'll see that color just got super dark. It's practically black. This doesn't change, but this color and what it's going to render, they are darker now. It is now properly gammaed for this scene, if you are working in the blur pipeline, okay? That's really important. If you've chosen to work with all of your diffuse textures and shaders or maps at 0.454, the way that blur does things, this is really important, that colors also you are gammaing. If you are not, and you're working, normal, then, this guy would be the opposite of what we're doing, okay? So, important stuff, at any rate. Alright, so that's all that happened there. That's why those V-Ray colors are there. And I am not going to save this, so I'm going to hose this thing all over the place. Basic reflection, and, low glossiness, and then using Fresnel. If you are not using Fresnel in one fashion or another, you should, either by setting a fall off here in your reflection, or setting a color with a map and then turning Fresnel on. I highly recommend it. All the cool kids are doing it. Well, actually, some other cool kids are doing some other stuff these days. Grant Warwick, one guy, if you don't know who he is, you should definitely check him out. He does some things maybe slightly different. I would say they're definitely awesome for stills and whatnot. For the type of work that we do, some of the methodologies are a little overkill and perhaps excessive at times. But the science and the ideas, the foundation behind it is absolutely sound. So if you haven't checked his stuff out, I would definitely recommend it. Grant Warwick. And no, I don't know him. This is not an infomercial. So moving right along, that is that's basically my shader for something like this. The other thing, though, the important thing with these pine needles is what I do for the leaves for these guys. And let's go to mesh. Let's check these guys out. Oh, and you're so stupid. There we go. All right. So what you'll see is I'm using these standard leaves, and I have set them to these little like square guys intersecting each other, and then I make them kind of long. And what that does is it allows these guys to have, when you place that alpha map on them, a little bit more dimension to them. When you're looking up at them or looking at them, they've just got a little bit more body. The reason why I do multiples then is so I can have varied lengths of these, because these guys suck, and they really do like an absolute size. So I'll do multiple leaves at different sizes, and in this case I did the same. Yeah. Well, normally what I would do is set these to different sizes, and that would give me some, added variation. Let's say 4 inches. And update. Because variation is good. Yeah, there we go. But these are very, very simple. I don't often use them, but sometimes they do come in handy. And again, as usual, multiple material IDs on all of these that coincide to, just like I did on the bark, different hues and opacity maps on my different needles. So again, lots of variation, but pretty simple stuff. I was messing with using like a standard leaf, or the leaf mesh, but I went with the standard leaf instead in this particular case. And again, that would kind of depend on the type of, the type of tree that you're doing, and even for like a conifer of this sort, some of them aren't as like sprucey, where it's really like dense. Some of them are a little bit more fern-like, in which case, using a leaf mesh would probably be the better thing to do as opposed to this. The other thing I want to talk about real quick, and it's something that I realized, I was telling you guys something, making videos too late at night. In order to, when I was showing you the one where I was sculpting it in ZBrush, and then I want to come back and I want to make this thing like blow in the wind or whatever. If you turn them off over here, and this is what I was talking about in the lesson, was like, oh, you just turn it off over here, and then you'll still have, and then it won't render. No, that's not true. If you turn it off over here, it's not visible in viewport, but it will render. So what would happen there is, if you did what I showed you in the last lesson, you would have two things rendering up on top of each other. And then you would be like, Chad, you're a jerk. Why did you tell me to do that? So before you get to that point, I'm correcting myself. And what you have to do is go into your mesh builders. And let's say you wanted to do that. You were going to take this trunk into ZBrush, and you were going to do the workflow that I was showing you. You copied it, you baked it out, blah, blah, blah. You did all that stuff. What you would then do is you would turn off your mesh. You still leave this guy on, and he can be visible in the viewport. The same thing with the bark. We could turn, his mesh off as well. So now if I update this, what you're going to see is a trunkless pine needle thing. But this will render, and let me prove this. Turn everything else on. So let's say, I want all of this stuff to have wind on it. And yes, I am going to get to that. I keep talking about it, and I don't show it. I'm going to show it, if you haven't already started messing with it. So I'm going to update. Alright, so now I have a trunkless tree. And then I'm going to quick render it. And haha, my proof. I'm not crazy. So it renders without a trunk or any of the bark. So this is where you could then insert your hero sculpted, trunk that you have so caressed and loved, and this thing would look like whip shit. So, or it would be the whip shit. You don't want it to look like whip shit. So that's kind of that that technique, and that's really what I wanted to cover for this tree. Feel free, as I said, open up the file, have a look at it. User be wary. If you open this thing up and you hit update immediately, your shit is going to crash, probably. Especially some of you guys with, quote-unquote lesser machines. So that is some cool stuff. The other thing I wanted to cover and I want to talk about, and let's go back to this guy here. All right, so you guys are all going to be making plants this week, and open up. Because I have to fix my Python. All right, you guys are all going to be making plants this week, and as such, or these are like your secondary plants. So as such, you should start having a look at kind of what I did here. I've talked about these ferns, and I don't remember if I did a couple of things though special that I want to talk about for what you guys are going to do that maybe didn't pertain to what I was doing. I'm just gonna let's turn everything else off. All right, so you've made your plant, right? And we're gonna also use Forestpack. Let's just make a box. You will bear with me for one moment as I make the world's most awesome box. be super awesome. Low poly modeling, high poly modeling. Bam. All right. The only reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to throw noise on it. And you'll see what I'm doing here in a minute. Except for I want to go the other way. All right. That thing is awesome. All right, so I'm just going to put him to the side for a second. And come back to my super awesome fern. All right. So here I have my stalks and I have my stems. And let's see what I did with this guy. I don't know that I used any Vertex color on my meshes for this. Let's see, did I? Oh, I did. Look at me. All right, so again, just like the pine tree, right? I set a Vertex color that is for. Let's just turn this guy off and display colors. If you display the colors, you can see in viewport your Vertex color. So all I did was set a color that is darker at the base, and as it comes out, it gets lighter, right? Simple stuff. Then, on my stems, if I turn them back on, and I go to... Oh, did I not do a Vertex color on these? Oh, okay. I guess I was just doing it on the stalks themselves, but normally what I would do is then go back into here, or I might have started to mess with it and decided I didn't want to do it, and say inherit from parent, now display those colors. And you'll see, like, these guys are darker, right, at the base, and they're getting lighter up at the top. Now I could additionally say color along path, and this might crash. Sometimes this Vertex color can get buggy. Just gonna cancel it because I don't know what it's doing other than probably crashing on me. Alright. I think it's just lying, maybe? I don't know. No, it's definitely not behaving. And... too many instances of Max running. Alright, that's okay. We can make a new one. Alright. Don't mind that guy for the moment. It's probably that super awesome box I put in that scene. Just crashed my shit. And PC. And I'm gonna make a pretty simple plant here for the sake of demoing. Oh, you know what though? I do want to show. Let's do this. Well, actually, we can just do it with this. All right. So I'm gonna make a multiple stalked, and that is actually what those ferns were, and I was gonna get into that, but and give them an offset. Okay, so you know, not all plants grow off of one like branch. Some of them have like multiple stalks, and they are kind of growing from a more complex root system. I'm gonna give this some chaos. And you want this kind of like situation where you have multiple stalks that then other branches and leaves are growing off of. So we can just give it some random direction because I love it so much. And let's Vertex direction these guys and give them a bit of a curve because we like to be fancy. All right, so now we have, these guys are doing some whatever it is that they're doing. And let's say, like, all right, this guy is like crossing into that dude's territory, and you don't really want that. Oftentimes, especially when I'm getting into like trees and stuff like that, I will use. I know I've talked about these. I know I've used them. I'll use one of these point vector guys, and I'm just making them really big so I can see them. Add another vector direction and set it to a point. So this guy, you know, is going to be like a point that pushes it away. And now if I bring this down, you know, way down, now you'll see they're kind of like, you know, growing out a little bit better. And now maybe I want to swap those two, right? Because the order matters. How, if I set that point first, or if I do random direction, all those things, how this stacking order matters. So now I've got, you know, guys that aren't really like condensed in here. And then you could also, like, sometimes I'll set, like, maybe I want these guys to really kind of hang low out here, and then I want another group, so I could call these like outer stalks, and then just for ease. And you know, sometimes you can do these things with a single set, but oftentimes it's just easier to set up two, and it's not a big deal because you can always like put your leaves and everything on the two guys, and instead of like throwing graphs and curves in every single little you know, nook and cranny on this thing to get the shape exactly the way you want, it just might be easier to say, all right, I'm just gonna you set up these two, like I've got my inner bank and my outer bank then, and I can kind of give these guys a random direction. And you could even come to this one, you could grab this guy, you could copy him, bring him up here, and you could instance him if you wanted. So now, you know, they're all kind of reacting relatively the same, but these guys, they don't have that like point instance pushing them, you know, so directly out. And then maybe you want to make this one unique because you don't want these guys to scoop down so low. You want them to kind of, you know, do something more like that. So this is where, you know, just setting kind of two guys up or three or whatever, this is just going to be way easier. Sometimes I do this, even though, like, yeah, I could come in here, I can, like, throw curves and do all sorts of, it's just like, you know, one, when I want it and I need it, this type of setup gives me a lot more control, and two, it's just simpler. If somebody else needs to open this and have a look through, they're not going to be like, what the hell did you do? So, you know, however you guys want to do it, but that would be, let's say, my my stalks, okay? So once I mesh these guys, simple cylinders for stuff like this. Don't go meta meshing all of your plants, okay? And something like this, I will copy and I will instance these meshes. All right, so now I've got, you know, this stuff, and because they're instanced, now when I start setting up vertex color, and this is where, you know, this instancing, that's nice because they're two different systems, but you can instance all this stuff and then it's basically reacting as one. And let's turn on the coloring, display color. Okay, so now we have, you know, this lovely ramp along that stalk. So now I can create a new, we're just going to put leaves right here. Some leaves on top of this. And let's give them some awesome leaf mesh. And they're going to be frickin' ginormous. And they need to first be told to go to inner stalk and outer stalk. Alright. lovely. All right. So whatever. This is our, trusty leaf mesh, and I want this to have vertex color as well. And let's not be like Chad. And we're gonna save. Can't get lucky today. And I'm going to turn this on, and I'm going to turn this on. So I want them to inherit from the parent, but I also want them to have their own, potentially. Now, for a leaf, it might be that you're really, these guys, as they get up higher, they're going to, maybe be a little bit more yellow. Maybe these guys are going to be a little bit more brown. And you can mess with this all you want. I'm going to set this to darken so that my leaves down at the base, they're more black, right? And as it climbs, leaves that are up at the tip top, they have more white on them. And this is just defined by their path. Now, if I set this guy, bring this darker, and now I've got just a little bit of white there, and then I come into my vertex color for my branches or my stalks, and you'll see like this guy is largely dark, but he's picking up some of that gray. And if I give myself another flag here, and it's just clicking it just like inside of Max, and I darken all these guys, now check it out. Those guys have no white on them, right? Because they're down lower. These guys in the middle have very little white on them, and then these guys up here, they have quite a bit. So these ones, they might be sun bleached, they might be dead or dying or whatever, and you can give them little yellow tips or little brown tips or whatever. These guys, they might be new growth, and they're perfectly green or something like that. And this allows you to, by setting the stalk vertex color and flagging that off as however you might like, and then additionally coming to your leaf vertex color, and tweaking it, giving it extra flags, and setting it to inherit parent. You want to turn that guy on, and then setting this to darken. That'll adopt this color, but then also let its color show more the brighter your stalk values get. So the more luminance you have from the stalk, the more the vertex color from the leaf is going to show through. So that is a nice trick that I use quite a bit to vary the vertex color. Then on top of that, once you add in this map for my leaves multiple IDs and so on and so forth, then you can get like, all right, now Mad ID 3, they're just going to be all green ones. Mad ID 2, they're going to be green with a little bit of yellow. Mad ID 4, these I'm going to make like, only like 10% of those, and they're going to be like a little bit green with, whenever they're up at the top, a little bit of brown too. They're like my, a couple dying ones. Then I've got a small amount of, perfectly green ones, and you might say like, this 30, and then I've got the majority of them are green with a yellow tip or something like that. However you want to do it. Okay? So that is vertex color in a plant. The other thing that, and right now this is nothing. This is just little gradients on our plant, right? The other thing though, and the reason why I made my, I'm going to get into a flower here in a minute. Why I made my super awesome box. Show you guys my high poly modeling skills. Is additionally we can control colors on our plants and whatnot by using Forestpack. So if you haven't downloaded that, there's a free version which doesn't give you all the options, but it will give you many of the options that you can feel free to download. I just want to get this some variation because I want to show some of the controls in Forestpack if you are not familiar with it. Wrong one. And let's get wild and crazy. Nah, let's not. Alright. Let's move my super awesome terrain. And then let's come under. Well, first, how do I do this? Let's do a shader first. Generally, before I do my forest packs, I will create shaders first. So let's make one for our plant. He's an awesome plant and deserves a shader. So obviously we're going to make a multi-sub material. And if I'm not looking in maps and I'm looking in materials instead, did I really... Alright. And I want to discard this guy. I'm going to set my number to 4. Alright, and I'm going to make this a V-Ray shader, V-Ray material. It's going to think long and hard. And in order, I'm just going to call this stock. And then before I do anything, I'm just going to copy this into the other one so I don't have to load up that thing again. Well, what I should have done is first renamed this Leaf A. Alright, seeing as how that's super slow. Alright. So now I've got my stalk, I've got 3 leaf variations. These guys are all, you know, V-Ray materials. And I'm going to just make a V-Ray color. It's going to be kind of greenish brown or something like that. And specify. And then I'm going to throw this guy into a composite. And I want to keep the old map. I'm going to add a new layer. And I'm going to duplicate this guy. Just so I don't have to open up the this guy twice. And then I'm going to come down here to Vertex color. So now the vertex color of these stalks is the alpha for this color. So anywhere where it's black, it's going to be this color. Anywhere where it will turn white, it will be solid this color, and anything in the middle is going to be like a mix of these two colors. So right now they're the same color, and I don't want that. So make this guy maybe a little bit more like yellowy or something like that. So now I have a lighter color, a darker color that transitions as it gets to the top to a lighter color. Now you can do this with textures, all the same thing. If I had one like map in here, I would use that as my base. I would copy it up here and I would put it inside of a color correction and still use this alpha, and then maybe set the brightness a little bit brighter for this this second variation, or darker, you know, depending on what it is you're trying to do. And let's apply this to our guy. All right, then first, I want V-Ray two-sided, and I'm going to keep my old. And I'm going to make this my front. Ugh, Chad. First, I need to go inside of it to rename it. All right, so this is leaf A, and this is his front, right? And again, I'm going to use, well, I am going to use a Vertex, Vertex color and a V-Ray color. For this, I'm not going to grab maps. This process will be exactly the same. Okay, so I don't need to have diffuse maps or anything like that in here. This will be identical if I have maps or not. So, and it just boinked me. Fucker. Alright. So, I've got my V-Ray color. I'm going to set this with a composite again. Keep old. Add a new guy. Copy this up to here. Again, Vertex color. This guy I'm going to set like kind of yellowy or something. Then I'm going to put all of this inside of a forest color. And I'm going to keep the old. And this is important. We're not scattering yet or anything, but go ahead and do this now, because if you start making all of these plants and you haven't done this, you're going to have to go back in every single one of your plants that you want to have variation, and you're going to have to add this. And you don't have to use it, but if you do want to use it and you set it up in the beginning, you're going to, like, you know, pat yourself on the back for being so smart. And I'm just going to set up some variations. And really, yeah, this will be okay. What I often do for something like this is I just set these guys inside of a color correct, and then I'll come back up, like I'll copy this guy, and I'll instance him now inside of this color correct, and then, you know, one I'll like desaturate it, something like that. And then make sure that this is retaining my instancing on this guy when I copied it. No, it is not. Another one, I'll, you know, like brighten it up. Another one, I'll maybe hue shift it a little bit, and I'm just pasting as instance every time I do this. I want to still be able to always tweak my base leaf, right? But I do, and I want those guys to retain their instancing, but I also want to be able to, like, you know, shift my hue a little bit and change the color, tweak the brightness, things like that. Additionally, and then another one I will leave exactly the way I already built it. So this guy and this guy, this one, should be an instance. Okay, So this is my base color, and then these percentages matter. So I'm going to say, you know, like 60% I want to be this color, and I don't know, 30% I want to be this color, 15 I want to be this, and then I always have, like, you know, maybe this is like, again, my like dead category. I always want to put a little bit of like some kind of off color in there, and then these are like elements on your plant, or items being scattered items. So let's say I throw a Forestpack on here and I distribute it all over the place, right? Each one of those is an item that has been distributed, and it will give them color variation per item, or it will give them color variation per each leaf. So you have to kind of decide, do you want each one of these leaves all over the place to be kind of scattered and made different, or once you like have this guy might be largely this, you know, however you built your base shader. This next one might have these other kind of variations to it. Generally for something like this, I kind of leave this somewhere in the middle, maybe going a little bit more toward item, so that it's just not like crazy frickin' rainbow. But you know, this you can control. You can always come back in, tweak that. You can tweak these values. All right, so I've set up my first side, and I would obviously throw in a reflection map. For this, I'm going to put in a color. So as this is an advanced, intermediate and advanced course, I'm not going to show you how to use reflection maps and bump maps and stuff. I am going to show you my basic workflow, or the workflow, how I do this, but you know, we're already going on an hour and 12 here, and I have a lot of other stuff I want to show. If I start going into maps and everything, this is going to get really, really long. If I do start to see, though, that we're having issues, I will address it. But let's move in with this and see how things go, okay? All right, and then I would generally, when I'm using these leaves, as I've shown you, I would also have an opacity map. Here is a V-Ray HDRI loader with a blur amount of 0.01, okay? So that would be my front. Then I would take this guy, I would copy him, and I would paste as a copy onto my back. And I would dive into this diffuse color again, and because I made all of those instances, and they're going to be instances in here again, now I can change this color, and generally, you know, the bottom side of a leaf is less saturated and a little bit brighter. And again, less saturated, a little bit brighter. And it also is less reflective. Maybe not that much. I probably should have made my first leaf a little, or my front a little bit more reflective. I would generally let a map do that. Oh, did I totally... You are so stupid. Oh no, it did do it right. Okay, good. Let's just make sure. Yeah, okay. I was just making sure I hadn't like instanced that shader across from the front to the back. Hopefully you guys are all UHF fans. And then I would paint a custom translucency map for my front and my back based on the texture. If you haven't, go to Peter Guthrie's site, and he's got a wonderful tutorial there on a fall tree. I'll post a link to it. You guys should all check it out. This tutorial already exists. I don't need to go into like every little bit how I do this because he does an excellent job. of describing it. So this is the general bones of it. The biggest difference, though, being that I want you guys to use these forest colors in order to give us some added color variation once we start distributing in the scene. Okay? Otherwise, my workflow is pretty much the same. I got it from him, from doing that tutorial. And it works really well for 95% of the stuff. Okay? If we fall into a case where we're in that other 5%, we can talk about that. But sometimes that leads down some other roads that are going to create massive render times. Okay, so I have my my trusty plant. You have your shader on your plant. You are ready to Forestpack this guy. So we go E2 Software, Forest Pro. Shut up. This is from my awesome hard drive, or my motherboard exploding on me. Authorize for this license manager to authorize it. Yes. Cannot be edited or rendered. Okay. Oh, you're a prick. Alright. I'm going to have to pause this and come back and reinstall my license. I need to go through my email now and find my license for that. Okay, so I'm going to pause that and I will come back. Okay, I'm back. Only problem is that it's a Sunday and I fried my motherboard and I had it replaced, and now something with the registry is not lining up with the licensing for Forestpack. So that's fantastic. I need to contact them and I won't be able to do it till tomorrow. I want to continue on with some other stuff. I will get this up ASAP tomorrow night after I've gotten this resolved. I do, however, want to show some other stuff. We've got lots I want to cover. So put a pin in it, let's say, for your plant and you're about to scatter it. But do get your shaders ready, all of that stuff. Grab the two domes, start evaluating in the lighting, getting things, you know, kind of looking nice and sexy. So let's say, though, you want, like, in addition to doing, like, big plants and whatnot, I also recommend doing some weeds and grasses and stuff like that. So how would I do that? Well, first, flowers. So to do that, I generally, and there's kind of an awesome technique that I saw on the X Level forum. So what you do, I don't know why it won't let me zoom into that. What you do, I've got this like distributor kind of turned on its side basically, and this is just a regular distributor, and I've given it a radial direction. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the first. There are two guys here. One is this radial direction. That's what's making it spiral like that. And if I turn it off, you'll see like you know, that doesn't do what I want. It just like wraps in on itself again and again and again. But like everything in Forestpack, we don't just put these guys on there without throwing a curve on it. So then I throw this, you know, handy dandy curve with a little bit of a you know, fall off on it, as much as you want based on what you're going to model. Okay, and then I put a vector direction on it to push it up, and this is using another global vector. So that's this point here. So I just put a point that's facing up, and then along the path. So at the beginning of the path, it has no effect, and while over the length of the path, it pushes it up to the amount that I want. And you can see, like, you know, I can make this as kind of rounded or not as I want. So this gives me this nice spiral formation that then I can, so again, a radial and a vector, nothing crazy. I can put petals now on this, right? And this I'm doing, I've got these two path position effectors in here. So you guys are used to seeing the length. We do this here all the time. The other thing that I'm doing though is I'm affecting the angle bend. Okay, so that is this guy down here. And we can turn that stupid thing off. That's this here, right? How much I want it to bend. And open this back up. So again, I have thrown a curve on that. So along the path, if you are at the base of the path, I want you to bend a lot. And if you are not at the base of the path, if you are at the top of the path, I want you to bend very little, right? So that allows me to get this kind of these falling petals, so to speak, as well. So let's say we were modeling, like a dandelion or something like that. So you'll see like these guys are kind of sticking out and drooping. These guys are like kind of sticking up. So in doing so, this allows you to, get this basic shape. And then I would come in and use my leaf mesh. And now I've got, flower petals that I can, based on the type of flower, if this were a dandelion, they're kind of like narrow and whatever. If it's not a dandelion, it's something more, like rose petal or something like that. You can make those tweaks as needed as well. So start to get something, more like that. And then the one thing I'm not doing like any sort of like chaos or anything like that. And obviously, you want to kind of use some of the things that we've used in the other lessons as well. Give this guy, some random direction. So these guys are not all like, exactly the same. Oh. Maybe some noise, some other stuff, just to kind of vary it up. Then what I can do, let's say I'm like terrible with plants and their names, or at least like flowers and stuff. But I want to do a different type of flower that's got like a little, shoop in the middle. Now you can put a piece of geo there that you texture map something to, and then what I would do is I would make this, and let's do this. I talked about this in the last, and to Forestpack. I talked about this a little bit in the last lesson as far as, baking these down to instanced mesh. Okay, so I would make my, little center thing, whatever that's called in the real world. Something like that. And obviously, you can add lots of other elements to this. The little guy is like sticking up, and, you can really go to town. But once I'm done with this, I would copy this. I always keep, live versions of what I'm working on laying around. I'm going to call this petals. I put them in a different layer and keep them for access. If I want to change stuff, I can go back. I'll save them out to a separate file. Whatever I have to do just to make my life easier. And I will check, where was it? Convert to mesh, add a edit mesh, and collapse. Then I will select this guy as well, and collapse, collapse selected. So now I've got a flower, right? Or what, you know, would be the base of this flower or whatever. Then I would say, and obviously this guy's huge, and that's okay. So one thing is, if you are doing like a dandelion or anything like that, if you tried to model that at real world scale, your dimensions, everything is going to be so insanely tiny. You really are going to lose a lot. When I do something like this, where it's a small object, I kind of do it to scale, but like at a bigger scale, so I have a lot more bandwidth. You know, it rounds out, and you end up like at 0.00001, and then you can't go any lower. You're like, ah, oh, shit. So, and obviously you can tweak those settings, but you start to get into values that that don't work out well, and I think even GrowFX doesn't completely respect your rounding preferences. So bring this guy, scale him down, and then I might make a new GrowFX plant. And because this is like a little flower guy, I might set this 4 inches. And then give it a distributor. Make him 1 foot. And then I would set a, make another one. Path position distributor. So I want to set this explicitly, and I want it right at the top. So I want to leave this guy exactly the way it is. I'll send him to path 1, add a position, right, and he's going to be at 100%, and then I'm going to make his length like 1 inch or something. 1 inch, not 1 foot. Man, I do that all the time. All right, and then just for the sake of not spending all day modeling a dandelion, I want you guys to be, you know, solid on like how you would do this and what to do. But I'm not going to like, and then I would add the leaves, and because you've seen how I would do that, okay? So now if I go to mesh this guy, instance geo. For my path 2, that's the guy with the position, and I would pick that guy. And oh no, Bob, or oh no, Mr. Bill. So he's rotated, and where is it? No, I do want that to be 360. That's just around the center point. I forget this. I might need to rotate my pivot on this guy. I always like mess this up. No. No. Yeah, these all kind of do the same. And there might be a control on this. I forget. No. Alright. Yeah, I think I always just tweak the pivot on it. Oops. I don't want to keep picking. Oh, yeah, see. That's why. Because I'm an idiot. And look at that. All right. And we could throw a cylinder on this guy, cylinder mesh. You know, obviously we don't want that. Throw a curve on that, and ooh, oh so nice. And again, my pivot is not set correct on this. So come back to this, right? We don't want our pivot right there. Effect pivot. Center. God. So I want that. Oh, that's certainly interesting. We might just have to repick that. Interesting. Did I do something goofy over here? Like put an offset? We could do that. That would be hot. I'm not going to, though. Stop that. And it makes sense that that's where that should go. Pivot to pivot. Stuff like this is always so fun. Oh, come on. You're such an a-hole. I might have to reset X-form this guy. I think he's just got bad sauce. Instance geo. Pick. Aha! When you have this guy, you gotta like come out here and right click on it. Otherwise, it just like have you like pick geo all over the place. All right, and you know this hotness, you guys know how to deal with this. Like we talked about that. Your minimum sides are too few, not 56. Right, and then you want to bring down your curve, all that stuff. Okay, so that would be creating some little like weedy flower, or this could, you know, it might be that you want these like little small dandelions in with your grass and stuff like that. That would be totally cool. Additionally, creating grass, just real quick. This is super easy. Another GrowFX guy. Make a distributor. All right, so, and then give it an offset. Give that some chaos. And let's make these guys. I need my direction modifier. 6 inches or something like that. A whole lot more of them. Bring their offset down. Then give them some chaos. And let's make them a foot, and then we will scale it just so we can really kind of see what's going on, get some good variation. And random direction. Add a vector. So now I'm going to do something that you haven't seen me do. All right, let's bring this guy. This is not it. You have seen me do this. The anticipation, though, is killing you, I'm sure. Bring this more. All right. So what I haven't shown you is there's this count rate. So now I can say I put this vector bend on them, right? So they're all like drooping. And I could make this more. Let's say what I want to do is like, all right, you guys, you're going to be like super droopy. And then I could set my count rate to something like low. I only have a couple of super droopers, right? Maybe they're not that super droopy, but whatever. They're like that, okay? And maybe I would make it slightly less so that when I add another vector direction, and again, alright, and then I can say like, alright, I only want you to affect 80% of these guys. So now I've got, you know, lots of variation in this. The other thing, as far as like scale, that I didn't mention, this step size, this can only go so low. So if you're building like all your little plants like super tiny, you're going to be very locked in by that step size. And let's show. All right, so we're good on these, I think. All right, so there's my grass, and then I simply throw a leaf mesh on this, mesh that, and not make it so chunky. Right? And then, additionally, you can, in your mesh settings, you can add vertex color to this, you can give multiple material IDs, all the stuff that I've shown you, and you can make some like super sick grass real fast. So that is making your weeds. You could also make these guys bigger. You could throw like custom, like that ragweed or whatever, some custom alphas onto this to make some really nice weed type stuff. If they're a weed, unless you're like getting like right up on this and like really macro shot, you're not gonna need like all the detail modeled in. You can get away with an alpha map. Okay, so think reasonably when you're doing these. Don't go and like model yourself like one of those weird ragweed leaves with the little spiky dudes and then instance geo that all over the place. Like that would be a bad move. Okay, so that would be making all of your secondary plants and all of that fun stuff. Shader for that would be the same as it is for a leaf, double-sided with a forest color slapped in there for when I get my Forestpack reauthorized. And then we can begin scattering these guys all about. Oh, I was going to show you. These are the domes that I've included. So you guys can have a look at those. Feel free, you don't have to use those. I'm just including them. They are domes that we use at Blur. I think we shot them, so I'm not distributing other people's stuff that they're selling. So that is GrowFX and shader workflow with thinking about Forestpack and so on and so forth. I don't know what the so on and so forth part is. It just makes it sound like I had more stuff to say. Let's see, what else? The hero fir tree. All right, I'm going to stop this one, and then I'm going to go over stone shaders, rock shaders, all of that stuff as well. And then I'll make a third video that is going to be the Forestpack and scattering this stuff. I'll probably finish off this little dandelion, give myself some grass, add maybe a little something to this. I don't know. It doesn't have to be super sexy, but so we'll go over some workflow of Forestpack. Wow. All right. I'll see you again.